What is up, everybody? It's 414 Anime here for Anime Uproar, and today I will be breaking down just how strong series antagonist Tomura Shigaraki is from the My Hero Academia series. Shigaraki has certainly become one of the most powerful anime villains we have had over the years. Not only powerful, but super fascinating too. So today we will be breaking down Shigaraki's power by looking into his quirks, abilities, fights, and more, so make sure you stay tuned for this one. We have made loads of My Hero Academia videos over here on the channel now, from like analytical videos to chapter reviews as they drop. If you do enjoy this video, then make sure to check out our last My Hero video like this, where we look into every one for all user. It's a tasty one and I'm sure you'll love it. So make sure to check that video out after this one. Link to that is in the video description. Now, if you do enjoy these My Hero Academia videos on the channel and you'd like to see more, you know what to do. Smash that like button. It really does help us out a lot. If you haven't already, make this the video you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Anime Uproar. And now, without further ado, let's jump into it. Spoilers and all. Tomura Shigaraki, born on April 4th, is 20 years old when we are first introduced to him in the series, which was in chapter 11 of the MHA manga and episode 8 of the anime. Now, he is currently 21 years old at the time of this video's making. He stands at 175 centimeters, which is about 5 foot 9 inches, and weighs 131 pounds. His real name was, of course, that of Tenko Shimura, grandson of the previous One For All user, Nana Shimura, who was the 7th user of the Quirk and former mentor of the former #1 hero, All Might. Now, for me, one of the most fascinating things about Shigaraki comes in his growth. I'm not sure if I'm alone in thinking this, but when we were first introduced to him as the big bad of the series, you know, the one who would stand before series protagonist Izuku Midoriya as his greatest enemy, I was a little underwhelmed by him. He seemed more like that of a bratty young man who had a chip on his shoulder that, the world must pay for. Things seemingly didn't go his way, and it was the world who was at fault for this. Yes, he had the warped personality and darker side to him that you'd expect to see in a villain, one where he could easily carry out malicious intent, including murder on others without, battering an eye of its evil deeds. But he just seemed to be an angry man-child who would constantly strop when things didn't go his way. I personally struggled to see how I could see him as the big finale to the series. Yes, he had some moments where he installed terror in us, such as the meeting with Deku at the Kiyashi Ward shopping mall in the final exams arc. It was the way he menacingly had his hand around Deku's throat, threatening to use his quirk Decay on him if he were to simply place his last finger around his neck. It was definitely a moment where I thought, okay, yes, this guy certainly has something about him, but prior to that and slightly after, I was largely unimpressed by him. Now, my point with all of this is that I can strongly stand here now and tell you that I was 100% wrong about this man. It was in his growth and, the overall puzzle that is Tomura Shigaraki that makes him a terrifying villain. As each of these puzzle pieces come together throughout the series, we are also following the journey of how this all-powerful villain came to be. And that's, for me, what makes Shigaraki such a powerful character in this series, and now the villain you look at as the real big bad of the show, with all the respect that he deserves. Just as we have been watching Midoriya's story throughout MHA of how he became the greatest hero, parallel to this, we've also been watching Shigaraki's story of how he became the greatest villain. And man, I can't get over just how well this has been executed. So yeah, throughout the video, we will be talking about Shigaraki's power, his quirks, and what makes him so strong. But I think, that growth or journey, the path the man has taken also leads to his overall strength. Now, in terms of his natural abilities, Shigaraki pre-All For One was a lot more stronger than his appearance led us to believe. As the leader of the League of Villains, he was able to deploy his units to the carefully planned and strategic manner of his well thought out plans. During the USJ incident, we saw Shigaraki take on Eraserhead. Now, there are two things that we can take from this. The first is that Shigaraki seemingly has no fear and the confidence in his own abilities to take on a pro hero all by himself. And he was definitely stronger than we thought he would be, as he was able to pretty much go toe to toe with him, even causing damage to Aizawa's right arm using his Decay quirk. Shigaraki was even confident enough to take on 4 UA students at once, that being Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, and Ejiro Kirishima. Yes, this 4 were nothing compared to how they were, now, but each of these students still showcased that they had that potential within them. The meeting with these 4 also showcased to us that Shigaraki was also a very tough character when it came to his own durability. Now, he took one of Bakugo's explosions head on and took little damage at all, showing that this man was going to be a very hard foe to take down. Not only was Shigaraki, strong physically and able to take some pretty big hits, he also demonstrated great speeds in his own movements. With his quirk being one that would only work when he physically touches something, Shigaraki needed to move at very high speeds to be able to get himself into the prime location where he is in a position to, dodge incoming attacks, catch his target by surprise, and then land the all-important contact for his quirk to completely devastate them. And looking back at the events of the USJ arc, I do think I was maybe being a little harsh on Shigaraki and how I didn't look at him as a proper end villain, but I guess that's hindsight with what we know now. I think the main thing that did stand out to me at the time and, in his praise was that of the man's intellect. You could definitely see that he had a very sharp eye for detail and just as sharp a mind to be able to react to those details that he was taking in. Shigaraki quickly manages to work out how his opponent's quirks and fighting styles work by simply observing them while they are in practice. He will then deduce how he can make their strengths work in his advantage. We saw this in his battle against Aizawa, where he quickly worked out his quirk Eraser and its weaknesses so that he could not only counter it, but then turn the situation so it posed strongly in his own favor. You really can't fault the man in this field, and he is certainly a person who seems easy to work out and understand, but in reality, you just have no idea what this guy is up to. Shigaraki is all about the unexpected, and this is without a doubt one of his greatest strengths, especially in those very early stages of the MHA story. So this leads us to a very good point to talk about his quirk. We've briefly mentioned it already in the video, but let's break it down more here. So Shigaraki's quirk is called Decay, which 1 is a very devastating ability and 2 a very, very awesome name for a villain's quirk. So big props to our boy Horikoshi on that one. So back in the day, Shigaraki's Decay quirk would allow him to disintegrate anything that he touches with all 5 of his fingers, or all 4 of his fingers and 1 thumb for the technicals out there. This disintegration worked at very high and rapid speeds upon Shigaraki's contact, spreading through their entire bodies in a mere instant. Now, this can be stopped if a person is able to amputate the decaying part of their body, so yes, there is a way in which to stop this, but what a devastating way to have to stop it. It really is advantage Shigaraki when his Decay quirk comes into play. Now, his Decay quirk also works on non-living beings too, such as building structures and so on. Shigaraki's Decay can also spread beyond that of what he is touching, which in turn allows him to take out a group of enemies all at once. The Decay quirk is a very, very nasty one to come up against, but like all quirks, it does have its weaknesses. The first is to, of course, prevent, him from touching you. Since he needs to be able to physically touch whatever it is he chooses to decay, you know what he is up to. And in such, there will be a moment in which he comes to you, and even for a split second, Shigaraki will be open and vulnerable to attack himself. The other weakness would be if he were to come up against those whose quirks allowed them to turn their own bodies into a non-solid object, such as, either water or sand. As we of course know, Decay would later go on to awaken and become a lot more devastating, but for now we shall move forward. So Shigaraki has always had a very distinctive look about him, and that was in his costumes, which were a set of 14 disembodied hands. These hands covered his head and upper body. So when I mentioned that Shigaraki was like a puzzle and, which we were fed pieces of him throughout the story that not only led to his growth, but also to who he was as a villain, these hands were of course a major factor here. So these hands were all in fact, the hands of his family that Shigaraki had accidentally killed when his Decay quirk activated for the first time. Every top villain needs that killer backstory, and Shigaraki is certainly no exception. So formerly Tenko Shimura, born to both Nao and Kotaro Shimura, lived in a house built by his father with his older sister Hana and his maternal grandparents. Tenko did not seem to have a quirk of his own, but instead he had an unknown allergy that frequently caused him to scratch his own face. Tenko was 5 years old at the time, and he had a love and fascination for heroes, like most of the other kids his age. His father, however, hated everything to do with heroes and was very strict in his ways of scolding the poor young Tenko if he were to ever bring them up. His father, was a very horrible man in this regard, but of course he had his own reasonings. His mother was the 7th One For All user, Nana Shimura, who had to abandon him for his own safety. Of course, he was never properly told that, so you can understand the grudge. This was also never explained to Tenko, who would also be on the receiving end of his father's anger when the mention of heroes arose. The rest of the family would, they'd comfort Tenko, but none of them dared to stand up to his father. Tenko caused trouble one day when he was pretending to be a hero, and his father punished him by leaving Tenko outside with no food until he had apologized. The rest of the family tried to tell Kotaro that he was being too harsh, but he wouldn't listen. Tenko's mother notices that his allergies are getting worse, but his father mentions that he hasn't manifested a quirk yet. If it's because of the allergies, then his suffering now will prevent any future suffering he may get in his road to becoming a hero. This was also confusing for the young Tenko, and to no surprise, of course, he was only 5 years old, and this kid didn't know if his own father hated him because, of his love for heroes. It was a really sad time for Tenko, and in an attempt to cheer him up, his sister Hana took him to his father's office and showed him a photo of his father as a child with his mother, who was clearly none other than a hero herself. Hana told Tenko the truth about his grandmother, and this understandably made Tenko so very, very happy. Hana wanted to support her brother's dream of one day becoming a hero and admitted that she shared that same dream too. Of course, this is where things took a very, very, very dark turn. Tenko was playing outside with the family dog. He was extremely happy to have found out that there was a hero in his family, and then felt a very strange and uncomfortable feeling in his hand. As he looked down, he realized that part of the ball that he was holding had started to crumble away. At the same moment, Tenko's father found out about the pair breaking into his office and looking at the photograph of his hero mother. He was absolutely furious and went off on a wild rage. He demanded that he was told who was responsible, to which his sister broke down in fright and in panic said that it was all Tenko's idea, to which of course it obviously wasn't. Kotaro went into a furious rage and started beating the poor Tenko, whose allergies began to worsen with every passing second. Tenko was itching relentlessly at this point, and he was begging his family for help, but all they could do was just look on in horror of the situation. After the beating, he was again punished to stay outside. Tenko was sobbing uncontrollably as much as he was scratching at himself. He hugged the family dog for comfort and said that he couldn't take this abuse anymore, and that he hated his family for leaving him to suffer at the hands of his father. As Tenko clutched tighter to his dog, his Decay quirk finally began to activate, causing the dog to crumble in his very arms. Tenko understandably began to freak out at what had just happened. His dog had just died, something weird had happened to his own body, and he was responsible for the death of said dog. I honestly can't even begin to imagine those feelings rushing through his head. It must have been insane. At this very moment, his sister Hana came outside to apologize to him. Tenko desperately tried to stop her and warn her not to come any closer, but the shock caused him to not, be able to speak himself. Hana noticed what had happened, and she then freaked out in horror. Tenko desperately tried and pleaded for his sister's help, but as he touched her, his Decay quirk instantly disintegrated her. Realizing what he had just done, the further trauma caused Tenko to vomit. Next, his grandparents came outside and Tenko's mind was all over the place. He hated them for leaving him to be beaten by his father, but he was traumatized and scared by what was going on. His hatred forced him to make the ground and his grandparents crumble before him. His mother tried desperately to help her son, but her body crumbled away just before she could reach out to him. Now, finally, his father Kotaro was alerted to the noise and went outside himself. Completely horrified by what he saw, he could only stand and stare as a distraught Tenko pleaded for his help. Of course, continuing to be father of the year, Kotaro instead pulled out a pair of gardening shears to protect himself and slashed at Tenko, cutting his son's face. And this was the moment. Tenko's rage and hatred fully consumed him in this moment, and he lunged at his father. He grabbed hold of his father's face with furious intent to kill. In this scene, we saw just how much pain, agony, and at the same time ecstasy the young Tenko was feeling in this moment, which resulted in the entire house crumbling as well. Of course, this event led to Tenko becoming an orphan on the streets. No one wanted anything to do with him because of his scary appearance, until he was eventually taken in by All For One, who adopted him as if he was his own son. Well, he told Tenko he was going to take him home and that from now on he would be his master, but we all know that this was the start of All For One grooming the young Tenko as his adoptive son. So he was taken in, given a room of his own, and was gifted the hands of his deceased family members. Understandably, this caused Tenko to go into shock. Izuku asked if he should modify Tenko, but All For One refused, saying that his hatred will linger within Tenko, teaching him purpose. Tenko embraced his family's remains, and All For One told him that he had an impulse to destroy that couldn't be controlled. That urges couldn't be satisfied, which led to the relentless itching that he felt. He said that this need to destroy didn't have to be controlled, nor was it a bad thing. Tenko later ran into two thugs in an alleyway who beat him up. He wanted to use his Decay quirk on them, but he backed down in this moment. Tenko then went back to his room in shame and itched violently because of the incident. All For One comforted him and asked Tenko what he wanted to do in that moment. Then Tenko looked at the hands of his family and declared that he wanted to kill the two thugs. His rage towards the two who hit him caused him to pick up and decay one of the hands. This, of course, pleased All For One greatly, and he knew what needed to be done. So Tenko returned to the two thugs, but this time was wearing his family's hands. He was told that if he were to wear these hands, then his family would always be with him. Dark, twisted, and all sorts of wrong. The two thugs, of course, called him creepy, but Tenko quickly dispatched of them using his Decay quirk. This was a weird one because Tenko felt sick and disgusted with himself, but at the same time he felt a sense of complete calm. He felt that at this moment he could do anything that he so wished. All For One and Izuku watched from a nearby rooftop with great pride. Now back at home, All For One congratulated Tenko and gifted him with 5 more hands so that he would always remember this day. 4 of the hands were of the 2 thugs he had just murdered, and the 5th was a small bonus for the one he had destroyed earlier that day. Putting on the new hands, All For One gifted Tenko a new name, Tomura Shigaraki. Tomura comes from the word that means to mourn, and Shigaraki is the real last name of All For One. After these events, All For One raised Shigaraki to eventually become his successor in the League of Villains and met the Nomu Kurogiri, who was tasked with aiding and with the development of Shigaraki himself. So yeah, pretty gnarly backstory there, and one that propelled Shigaraki as the main villain of the series. Backstories can really make or break a character, but Shigaraki's was very, dark and opened up so much more on his character. So before we move on, let's just look at the hands that Shigaraki wears. So the 2 around his neck are that of his mother's. The ones on his upper arms and elbows are that of his maternal grandparents. His sister hands are worn around his wrists. Now, the hands on his shoulders and midsection are those hands of the 2 thugs, and the hand that he wears over his face is that of his father's. There is one more hand that he wears on the back of his head. This was the one that was gifted to him as a replacement for the other hand of his father's that he decayed. Now, this is later revealed to be the hand of none other than his paternal grandmother, Nana Shimura. So because of his past trauma and his extreme hate for the hero society, Shigaraki has developed an incredibly strong display of willpower. This willpower of his is arguably one of Tomura Shigaraki's greatest strengths, and one that has been shown to strike the essence of complete fear in his enemies. Shigaraki has often been on the losing end of a battle, but through his sheer determination to never give in, to not be defeated until he has reached his goal, and to continue to itch the urge to destroy absolutely everything, he has always found a way to come out on top. Shigaraki just has this very intense and very frightening aura about him that is very clear to see. His gaze fixated on his one and only target is one of pure malice, and these 2 things are fueled by this willpower of his. Now, his will I've always likened to, the Sith in Star Wars, who draw upon their hatred to give them more power. The stronger their feelings of hate, the more power and, more devastating they become, even managing to pull off things that are considered impossible. Shigaraki's hatred, his will to destroy, is what makes him so powerful as a villain. Without his hatred to pull upon, Shigaraki would have been defeated a long time ago, but he always gets right back up no matter, the opponent or how strong the attacks they have. His will allows him to shrug off injuries or pain that would KO a normal opponent, and the scary thing about it is that Shigaraki will get back up even stronger than before. Now, it was also Shigaraki's will that was one of the key reasons that All For One chose Tomura as his successor. It was Shigaraki's will to destroy that would force the current One For All user as well as the spirits of the previous users out to confront him so that they could make One For All's power one of their own. And that Shigaraki's body and will were more than strong enough to steal that power when the time would come. We of course see Shigaraki continuing to grow as the series progressed, but not in any major way. After the downfall of All For One at the hands of All Might, Overhaul visited the League of Villains hideout, but is not impressed by the hideout or by Shigaraki himself for that matter. With All For One's defeat, the throne of the underworld was vacant and awaiting a new king. Shigaraki of course believes this spot to be his, but doesn't have a plan in getting there, which leaves Overhaul disappointed, going as far as saying that the League of Villains should join under him. This of course was a strong no from Shigaraki, but as this arc played out, you could see that the two groups were kind of forming some sort of alliance, though neither side truly trusted the other. It always seemed that one side was waiting for the other to slip up. And this for me was more growth for Shigaraki, but more mental growth than that physical. Shigaraki was playing the long game here, and more than that, we got to see just how sadistic he could be. So Overhaul eventually fell to the heroes and was captured. The League of Villains located the transport that was carrying Overhaul and managed to capture it. Shigaraki frees Overhaul from the police van, but he is still restrained. Here, Shigaraki mocks Overhaul for his arrogance and his ultimate failure. While Shigaraki is explaining that he hates him, Overhaul believes that Shigaraki is going to kill him here, but what Shigaraki does next is much more brutal. Overhaul's quirk gives him the ability to disassemble anything that he touches, and he can then reassemble that thing however he pleases. Overhaul's main plan of course was to take other people's quirks away from them so that he and his group had the sole power. So for Shigaraki, instead of killing Overhaul there and then, what Shigaraki does is to take his quirk away from him by removing his arms. Mr. Compress gets payback and removes Overhaul's left arm with his quirk, while Shigaraki uses Decay on his right arm. As it begins to decay, Shigaraki amputates Overhaul's right arm so that the decay doesn't spread throughout his entire body, leaving him alive. Now unable to ever activate his quirk again, Shigaraki taunts him for being a helpless, quirkless man. He gloats by saying, "Everything you've worked so hard for is mine now." He continues to laugh in his face, knowing that the League of Villains will be the next rulers of the underworld, and not him. All the while, Overhaul will be alive and powerless to do anything about it other than watch. In this truly horrifying moment, all Overhaul can do here is scream in a combination of, sheer horror and frustration. And I have to say, this was honestly one of the first times I was truly shocked and scared of Tomura Shigaraki. This was a huge moment that, cemented him as the vision of absolute pure evil. So, Shigaraki's powers continued to grow naturally over time, not just his quirk, but all of his natural abilities with it. This was on full display when he was tasked with taming and making Gigantomachia obey him. The League of Villains were incredibly weak, broke, and without much of a plan at this time, with, even the members questioning Shigaraki's ability to lead them. Dr. Ujiko had offered Shigaraki a way out, but only if he could prove himself against his master's old bodyguard. This was a very long and drawn-out battle that lasted over a month and a half, but absolutely everything Shigaraki had at this point was seen to have developed, and were definitely continuing to grow throughout the encounter. Shigaraki was very close to taming Gigantomachia as they were then contacted by Destro, the Grand Commander of the Meta Liberation Army, who had captured Jiren and were holding him hostage, forcing the League of Villains to face off against the Meta Liberation Army in Dike City. This arc, My Villain Academia, was a very, very strong one for Shigaraki, as we got a visual display of just how much stronger he and the League had become, although they were all of course beginning to fatigue due to the month-and-a-half battle with Gigantomachia. So it was in his battle against Destro that we saw Shigaraki undergo a Quirk awakening. This Quirk reawakening significantly boosted the power, effectiveness, and reach of Shigaraki's Decay. In the battle, Shigaraki lost 3 of his fingers, but he could still use Decay, though it was much weaker and less effective. However, with the Quirk awakening, Shigaraki could completely demolish anything his power comes into contact with, even if he hadn't made contact with it himself physically. Shigaraki demonstrated the awesome power of his awakened Decay by completely destroying Daika City and handing Destro a massive L in their battle together by using his one good hand. Later, he underwent surgery on his hand, which significantly boosted the power of his Decay Quirk, as we saw when he took out almost a third of Jakku City using Decay. Even being hit by the rubble affected by his Quirk was strong enough to kill the unfortunate person who came into contact with it. Not only did Decay become much stronger, but Shigaraki also gained a lot more control over the Quirk too, allowing him to hit specific targets at will and spare those that he wanted to while devastating everything around him. Now, the conclusion of Shigaraki and Destro's fight results in a union between the Meta Liberation Army and the League of Villains, now named the Paranormal Liberation Front, who is led by none other than Shigaraki himself, who also has the respect of Gigantomachia at this point. So, Shigaraki then undergoes surgery to make him even more powerful than he has already become. The result of this surgery will be to obtain a body that has much greater control, a body that will be able to wield a power much greater than All For One himself. This new body will even allow Shigaraki to obtain One For All, which interestingly was a quirk Shigaraki didn't know about until it was explained to him before the surgery. Now, of course, the downside to this surgery is that it will last for 4 months. Not only will it take that long, but Shigaraki will also have to endure an agony greater than anything he ever has felt before. As we know, Shigaraki didn't manage to finish the surgery, as at 75% completion, his tank is completely destroyed by Mirako and the Doctor's equipment by Present Mike during the hero's raid on the Paranormal Liberation Front's hideouts. However, even at 75% completion, Shigaraki is a completely different beast now. So much so that Endeavor compared him to All Might in terms of raw physical power, and other pro heroes could instantly sense that Shigaraki needed to be taken down, and quickly. So in terms of his natural abilities here, Shigaraki's strength was augmented greatly. We saw just how high he could jump and how mobile he was by just using the muscles of his souped up body. I mentioned Endeavor had compared him to All Might in this field, but the Doctor said that he wasn't quite at his level just yet. However, we did see just how strong he was when he was taking on Endeavor, Ryukyu, and Deku using One For All at 45%. Shigaraki also managed to overpower them with relative ease, all while Aizawa was erasing his quirks. Not only was he a beast physically, but his speed, stamina, and durability were all skyrocketed by the surgery. Shigaraki was able to blast around Jakku City, outmaneuvering several pro heroes, and by pushing his body beyond its current limit, he was even able to catch up to Gran Torino, who is the fastest hero in the world. The amount of insane power moves his body was able to withstand was also nothing short of insane. As we know, Endeavor has zero chill when it comes to his moves and fighting style, yet Shigaraki was able to brush off a Hell's Curtain and move on with things. Even Bakugo's AP machine gun was nothing to Shigaraki, and to further demonstrate his sheer insane durability, was Shigaraki withstanding multiple Deku 100% One For All smashes. To go with this durability is the ability to withstand the huge amount of pain he would have endured from these attacks and to still keep fighting. To push himself further beyond his limits, moving faster and hitting harder than he had before. Despite these impressive feats, his body did of course have its limits, though he had pushed beyond them, and he showed moments of temporarily beginning to break down. He'd eventually lose consciousness in this fight, but only to regain his consciousness and keep fighting. Though it wasn't Shigaraki who regained consciousness here, but All For One, who was in control of Shigaraki's body. All For One confirmed that Shigaraki had taken a loss to Deku and Endeavor in this fight, but Shigaraki must face this loss for his own sake. He does manage to escape the battlefield so that he can finish off his surgery and come back to fight again at 100%. Now, part of Shigaraki's surgery was having All For One's original quirk transplanted to him. The All For One quirk allows its user to steal the quirks of other people and use them as if those quirks were, their own, creating an arsenal of superpowers at their disposal. So, let's look at the quirks that Shigaraki has, or has had. The first is of course super regeneration, in which Shigaraki can regenerate and heal himself from any wound or injury that he had suffered at very high rates. Shigaraki really takes high speed regeneration to a brand new level, not only in its speed but in the injuries he has suffered and recovered from, such as a mighty Hellflame from Endeavor back in chapter 274. He had Air Cannon, in which he could shoot out powerful blasts of air from the palms of his hands. To also increase the amount of damage he can dish out with his attacks, he also had the quirk Heavy Payload. As well as that, he could manipulate his own muscles to improve his own physical strength and speed, called Spring-like Limbs. Rivet Stab is a quirk in which Shigaraki can create large black tendrils with red cracks in them that he can use on the offensive to pierce his enemies. He also had Scatter, which allowed Shigaraki to split up projectiles coming at him that would then scatter all over the air. Now, to increase his evasive abilities, he has the quirk Wing, which, as the name suggests, allows Shigaraki to grow 2 huge black wings from his back, gifting him the ability of flight. Radio Waves is a quirk that allows Shigaraki to disrupt radio waves, which will cause his opponent's communications to completely malfunction, which severely dents their strategy moving forward. Shigaraki, of course, also has the Search quirk that was formerly Ragdoll's. This quirk allows him to look at about 100 different people at a time, determining their location and even their weaknesses, allowing Shigaraki to completely overwhelm them or launch stealth-like attacks. Shigaraki also had the Reflect quirk, where he could reflect attacks back at his opponents, but this quirk was eventually destroyed by Star and Stripe's New Order quirk. Speaking of, we actually saw Shigaraki use the stealing powers of All for One in that battle against America's #1 pro hero Star and Stripe, stealing her quirk, which we had just mentioned, New Order. He used the power of the One for All quirk to steal New Order from Star and Stripe. This quirk allowed Shigaraki to create and set up 2 rules on his surroundings that would then be manipulated in his will. However, due to a rule in which she had already set in place before it was stolen, the quirk revolted against the other quirks Shigaraki had in his body. This then caused the quirk to self-destruct and take out some of the quirks he had stored up already. Now, Shigaraki's battle against her was an absolutely thrilling and important battle for him. We really got to see just what Shigaraki was made of here and just how terrifying a man he had become. Mad props to his durability as well, by the way, that was clearly shown in this battle. Star and Stripe used an almighty hypersonic intercontinental cruise punch, an attack so ferocious that it could actually be seen from the Japanese mainland. Shigaraki managed to bury himself underground to protect himself from the main brunt of the attack, but even still, most of his body was completely destroyed from the blast. Shigaraki, however, managed to continue fighting and eventually get the win. Now, going back to the All for One quirk. Just as One for All, the quirk contains the will and consciousness of its previous owners. Now, whereas the previous One for All users are on Deku's side, helping him to grow strong enough to defeat the big bad, All for One's previous owner is, of course, not that good a guy. Instead, All for One is trying to take control of Shigaraki's body through Shigaraki's negative and hateful emotions. I tend to liken All for One as a virus on Shigaraki, and for me, the inner struggle he had with this power again added more love for Shigaraki as the big bad of MHA. So lastly, we have to talk about the current Final War arc, and of course those monstrous forms that Shigaraki has undergone. Now, due to the surgery which modified Shigaraki's body and gave him All for One and the many other quirks, Shigaraki's body continues to grow at an alarmingly high rate. This accelerated growth has caused Shigaraki's body to mutate so that it could adapt to the quirks and powers that he possessed. This is also known as Quirk Singularity. Now, these mutated forms of Shigaraki's are really something else. The missing fingers on his left hand began to slowly regrow until the process greatly accelerates, where Shigaraki's left arm becomes this monstrous and grotesque arm of moving fingers in different shapes and sizes. The result of its gross look is that Shigaraki's decay is a lot more devastating in not only its reach, but its power too. Shigaraki said himself that this was his body adapting to the large amount of quirks that have been stockpiled within him that are frantically searching for its final and most perfect form. The final form is something we have seen very recently in the MHA manga at the time of this video making, which is his apex form. This thing looks insane and, like, the word of the moment here, monstrous. His torso and head are entirely covered in hands, and his own left hand has the images of the Shimura family. Now, of course, we haven't seen the true power of this form yet due to Monoma using Aizawa's erasure on him, but I feel that it will only be a matter of time before Shigaraki is released from that. Especially as this is set up to be the big final battle between himself and Deku. All for one versus one for all, and I can't wait to see just how powerful and epic this final form is going to be. So that is it for Shigaraki, truly a progression story within MHA into the overwhelming and chaotic villain he has become now. He is easily the strongest villain in all of the MHA story, and I really can't wait to see this guy go all out. Though I will of course be rooting for our boy Deku, obviously. Good luck to him. Good luck to him is all I'm saying. So I hope you enjoyed today's video highlighting Shigaraki as a villain as well as his powers and abilities. Let us know in the comment section below what your thoughts on Tomura Shigaraki are and if you have any interesting theories on him as we move into MHA's final phase. How strong do you think he is going to be? Of course, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more MHA videos on the channel, make sure to let us know by smashing that like button. If you haven't already, make this the video you subscribe and hit the notification bell to turn on all notifications or you will miss future MHA videos, including weekly chapter reviews as they come out. Remember, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar. Thanks again. We can't wait to see you in the next video. Till then, my friends, take care of yourselves. Peace!